House Committee on Appropriations will come to order. Will the clerk please take attendance?
Chair Whitwer.
Here.
Representatives O'Neill.
Present.
Brixey. Hood. Braybeck. Morris. Peary. Steckloff. Weiss. Martis. McKinney. Menser. Morgan. Price. Skaggs. Snyder. Wilson. Leitner.
Here.
Bolin. Green.
Present.
Slaw.
Present.
Beeson. Horton.
Here.
Fink.
Here.
Cavett.
Present.
DeBoer.
Here.
Kuhn.
Here.
Schutte.
Here.
Steele. Madam Chair, you have 29 members present. You do have a quorum.
Thank you. Representative Leitner moves to approve the minutes of the January 25th meeting. There being no objection, the minutes are approved. The only order of business today is to hear from MEDC, who will educate us on the Strategic Outreach and Attraction Reserve Fund, or SOAR. The committee will play a vital role in the way SOAR resources are allocated, so it's beneficial for us to get a refresher on our responsibilities and stay up to date on what MEDC is working on. Here with us today is MEDC President and CEO Quentin Messer, alongside Greg Bird, Managing Director of Legislative and External Affairs at MEDC.
Good morning, members. Thank you so much for affording me this opportunity. More importantly, thank you for your continued public service. What I hope to do is go through quickly, and if it be the chair's prerogative, answer any questions. So want to level set expectations, and we can make sure that you have electronic versions of these slides. I know you have them in physical hard copy, but want you to understand what was the purpose of the Strategic Outreach and Attraction Reserve Fund. What we are seeing, particularly over the last arguably 18 to 20 months, because of a number of geopolitical matters, you see tremendous dollars come in, whether it's the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, Build Back Better. You see a lot of dollars at the U.S. federal level, but also candidly globally, whether it's be in the EU and Asia, to go to try to secure investments. So SOAR projects typically have over $1 billion in private investment and create over 1,000 jobs. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about why is this strategically important for the state of Michigan. One of the reasons that you see a lot of federal dollars is really the transformation that's happening in the mobility sector, particularly the passenger vehicle sector. And today, Michigan is the largest auto manufacturing state with almost 12% of North American production, and 3 OEMs are headquartered here in Michigan. So in many respects, we have what so many other states, particularly in the Southeast or in the Southwest or elsewhere, want. We have the rich supply chains that have changed the course of Michigan over time. Next slide, please. So with this transformation from the internal combustion engine to electric vehicles, there are hundreds of thousands of jobs at stake. The auto industry currently creates 1 out of 5 Michigan jobs. You can see on the slide, and let me just try to simply reduce it. Try to summarize what it might say. Currently, it's 1 out of 5 because of the current propulsion system, but that's not guaranteed. If we don't retain and win and ensure that future battery plants and OEM facilities occur here in Michigan, we can see the at-risk nature of us not maintaining. If you're going to look on the right side, you can see if there are no additional EV facilities, our 12% of current production will go down to 3%. If we maintain the current share of EV, it's 8%. And if we increase our EV share, we can retain that 12% of current production. because of the competition elsewhere on the I-75 corridor, our ability to not only retain battery production and OEM facilities for our legacy Big Three as well as Toyota, but also, as you see, increasing production capacity come from the Koreans and elsewhere and other automakers. This is a moment, and these facilities and opportunities typically, if you go back to that first slide, if you recall, $1 billion plus in private investment and 1,000 plus jobs. Next slide, please. So let's talk about beyond the number of jobs at stake. Let's talk about why I would argue so many other states, provinces, and we are indeed in intense competition across North America, not just the other 49 U.S. states, but also the Canadian provinces as well as the Mexican states. You can see the obviously sales and jobs multiplier. You see the population and income multipliers. What is the short version of this? There is a reason why other states that have personal income tax rates, states that don't, incent and try to secure these type of opportunities because they know what we have lived for the last 115 years. The fact that these are uniquely rich and robust supply chains that are rarely replicated in other industries. And you can see the employment impact not only from a direct employment and indirect, but also induced employment and the impact it has on communities in both peninsulas. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about another sector that was outlined by the governor in her, subsequently, not only in her victory address, but in subsequent statements. She looked at three sectors: mobility, semiconductors, and clean energy. And there's a reason why. That's not to exclude agribusiness, tourism, hospitality, other sectors, but there is a desire and a recognition that at the federal level, we want to align with dollars that are being spent, whether it's chips in semiconductor, IRA, that's affecting battery and automakers, as well as things that are coming out of Department of Energy that has a benefit in clean energy. And so what you see here is a similar impact analysis of the semiconductor industry. And you can see that it is one of the few sectors that has the same type of comparable impact. And I would call your attention to what you see, the growth in certain parts of Arizona, certain parts of Texas, where you see domestic semiconductor fabrication activity. We believe that Michigan should be one of those places because, as you might imagine, one of the largest customers in the semiconductor industry happens to be the automotive sector, as well as aerospace and life sciences. And so this talks about the multiplier effects, and this is why we believe that the 21st century value chains that we want to make sure and supply chains happen here in Michigan will be connected to the semiconductor sector, and we're already off to a good start. Next slide, please. So the SOAR Fund was created last year. Not last year, I'm sorry. It was enacted in December 2021. I want to emphasize that the money can only be expended through the legislative transfer process. So this committee, as well as your counterparts in the Senate, will always evaluate any deposit that goes into the SOAR Fund. The other thing I also want to make sure is that frequently when it's reported in the press about incentive packages, there's not a check that goes out the door. This is performance reimbursement. Companies must perform and they must comply. And every agreement that is in place since I've been here, and I'm sure even prior to my arrival, has clawback provisions in case companies don't perform. I know we can address particular questions, but I just want to emphasize those 2 points quickly. Next slide, please. So what is the MSF approval process? As most of you members know, the MEDC, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, can only make recommendations about how tax dollars are going to be spent. Ultimately, it is the Michigan Strategic Fund that is a 11-person committee. In fact, the Speaker has an appointment, the Senate Majority Leader has an appointment, and then the governor has the remaining appointments. That Michigan Strategic Fund either accepts or rejects recommendations by MEDC. And so in the traditional process, as you can see, it is typically we do exhaustive due diligence. MEDC staff makes recommendations to the Michigan Strategic Fund, and the MSF can make a decision either just to accept those recommendations and approve or not. The SOAR process ensures that we have a partnership with our legislative body. So once a recommendation is approved, because if it wasn't approved by the MSF, there was no need to come to SOAR, we then come back, and this committee, as well as your Senate counterpart, Appropriation Committee, makes the evaluation of whether that a SOAR deposit will be made. And this body, at that particular time, will receive the opportunity to raise and ask a number of questions. We at MEDC will produce documentation based upon those questions, and then once that is satisfied, then you will make either an up or down decision. And frequently this is a collaborative process that we have gone through any number of times, beginning with the first, which was General Motors, and then we had a subsequent Ford announcement in June of last year. Next slide, please. So what are the key components of the SOAR agreements? One, disbursements are made only when eligible expenses occur. So this means that it's performance reimbursement. So a dollar doesn't go out until the performance happens. Second, the repayment process is triggered if a company fails to meet job creation or investment commitments. Remember at the beginning, we talked about that this SOAR fund was created in response to the unique opportunity before us for having typically $1 billion in private investment, as well as 1,000+ jobs. Third, legislative approval is needed prior to finalizing the contract. Again, this is something I mentioned earlier. The partnership not only between MEDC and economic development writ large, but between the executive and legislative branches. Fourth, the critical industry program awards through SOAR are made to companies investing in state. And last, the strategic site, and there are two components. I was remiss in not outlining this before, but there are two components to the SOAR fund: the critical industry program and then the strategic site readiness program. And the strategic site readiness program awards through SOAR are made to local economic development organizations and or local governments. That's typically to support the required site infrastructure. One of the things that I think that we've learned, and I think because of your actions and your predecessors' actions, as well as partnership with the executive branch and private development, we have really closed the gap with not only our southern competitors, but also competitors in Canada and Mexico on making sure that our sites are prepared to absorb some of these transformative opportunities. And that was really because of the work focused on this strategic site readiness program. Next slide, please. So we're on this journey to greatness. The SOAR has had a tremendous impact, secured private commitments of over $13 billion, jobs created and retained almost 13,000. You can see some of the third-party validation of opportunities all across this great state. Next slide, please. The one thing that I think, and I will be the first to admit I have to do a better job of doing, is connecting the benefits of SOAR projects, these large transformation projects, to small and medium-sized businesses across both states. Across both peninsulas throughout the state. At the end of the day, there's a reason why so many other states and provinces want and are aggressively pursuing investment in the automotive mobility sector as well as semiconductor. These industries, as we talked about in some of the earlier slides, have tremendously rich value chains and supply chains, which create entrepreneurial opportunity for small and medium-sized businesses. There's a reason why when I was growing up in Jacksonville, Florida, and I would look at the Black Enterprise 100 list of the top businesses, frequently a lot of those BE 100 businesses were headquartered in Detroit because they were suppliers, either Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3 suppliers to auto industry. And that's what we're trying to do with SOAR and make sure that in the 21st century, we do that in mobility, semiconductors, and clean energy. Next slide, please. So I would say, as all of you are aware, because you've answered the call to public service, you've made sacrifices, your families have made sacrifices, you indeed get it. The time is now. We are in an 18 to 30-month window. As I talked about before, CHIPS Act dollars, IRA, significant activity by the Department of Energy, Department of Commerce. And we have and we know that capital is going to be deployed by companies in this next 18 to 30 months. We have seen legislators across the country. Just even yesterday, I read an article about Oregon, looking at work that they're doing in semiconductors. I read an article about what South Carolina and North Carolina are doing in the mobility space and ensuring that there are other strategic sites that they're prepared for. So we know that when Team Michigan comes together, there's nothing that we can't do. I'm grateful for your time, and if it be the chairwoman's prerogative, I will answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Besser. There are questions from members. Representative Leitner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the questions I have is in regards to when you're picking projects. And I was just curious, when you are looking at projects for the SOAR consideration, is there a hard and fast ratio for the private to public investment? And then if not, what's the criteria to justify any type of variance?
It's a great question. I would say there isn't a hard and fast, well, the only hard and fast ratio is that we want to make sure that there's a positive return on investment. So as we weigh the amount of incentive packages, we have a third-party proprietary system that our team uses to evaluate the return on investment. One of the things that I will commit to you is we want to be aggressive, but we do not want to be desperate. And so what we want to propose is the minimum amount that will allow us to secure the wins. There will be other states and provinces that sometimes will outbid us. I mean, we've seen that before. But we need to make sure that we're always prudent and fiduciary. And so a lot of that is a judgment call that we do not only in consultation internally at MEDC, but we have a number of industry research partners that we talk to ensure where are we missing the market, and are we making sure that companies understand some of the unique assets that they can achieve here in Michigan that they're not going to have elsewhere.
Representative Green.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually have two questions. May I ask them?
Sure.
Okay. You said 2021 we created the SOAR Fund, and I was here part of that legislation. If I remember correctly, there was a process prescribed in law. We do this, then this, then this, and it was a prescriptive process. Since you stated that the funds must go through this committee, in your opinion, is it appropriate and legal to send funds directly through legislation to the Infrastructure Site Readiness Fund or to the Job Retention Fund, bypassing this committee's process?
Well, I will say, and I've said publicly, my responsibility is to provide both the legislative and executive branches with the best, honest assessment of Michigan's competitive positions. I will leave for the elected officials to make determinations upon the process of how you decide to allocate dollars. That is not my responsibility.
Great, thank you. With that, I know you moved in, I believe, Louisiana.
Yes, I did.
So you've been involved in this for a long time. In your MEDC position, not so much looking directly at the SOAR fund. Statistics show that there are really two economic competing philosophies of job creation. One is to subsidize the growth, giving out large grants. The second is to reduce the income tax to at or below 4%. Is it possible to do both? To cut the income tax to 4%, as well as cutting, well, that cutting of 4%, would it lower the result that we need for the SOAR grants? So instead of an $800 million grant, by cutting it down to 4%, would we need to give $400 million?
Representative, that's a question for budget, not really for MEDC. So we'll be moving on from that.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Representative Boland?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome. It's great to see you in person. My question has to do, one is I think that, we established the SOAR fund last session, and I think it will do a lot to restore the public's confidence as the legislature appropriates money and has some more conversation and a role to play in these agreements. And, we kind of working through the kinks, if you will. But one of the things that came up last year was we would have discussion here at the Appropriations Committee for some suggestions or questions of making sure the clawbacks are in place that satisfy the legislature. And I'm just wondering if you have any suggestions for that process. And one, timing is extremely important on these projects sometimes. And so any suggestions on the process to make sure that we're getting the legislative input, request for changes to those agreements in continuing the conversation?
Sure, Greg, if you could go back to the process slide. I would say this. I think that you're absolutely right. I think a lot of the legislative input was received and is reflective of the current agreements. What I don't want to do is to signal to competition exactly how we're structuring our agreements. I will tell you, for someone who, I did come from Louisiana, as Rep. Green suggests, the amount of rigor, the process here in Michigan is significantly more complex than it was in Louisiana. And if you look at some other southern states, it is more complex. That doesn't mean that it's better or worse, but companies, when they objectively look, most people want to press the easy button. And so what I want to do is, I think there is an opportunity to have conversations about the term sheets. You can rest assured that in every agreement, there are clawback provisions, meaning performance, breach, unremedied breach, money will come back to the state of Michigan. You can ensure that there's baseline employment levels. You can ensure that if there is a job action that results in a loss of employment, that companies can't reemploy someone and count them as net new jobs. So these are things that came out of feedback through last year's process that are a part of the agreements. I look forward to having further conversations, but again, I don't want to telegraph particular parts of our agreement because of our competition.
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So I think what, and I agree with you, and these are moving parts and they need to move along. And the purpose is to be competitive or ahead of the competition, if you will, so we get the win. But my question is the clawbacks beyond the clawbacks. And so maybe it's just something that you could consider and maybe we can have a conversation about. The concern happened to do with a water treatment plant, as I recall, and it was going to be a exponentially large expansion of it. And so there was concerns by the committee of long-lasting, what does that mean to the other users on that because of how they're funded. And I ask that only because I came from a community and local government that increased capacity at a treatment plant, and the growth didn't come, and then it was on the users. So that's why the question, and just making sure that we, there is a provision, or the municipalities and whoever's entering into this, that, we're protecting the people beyond just the economic development project with long-term maintenance and further capital reinvestment to upgrade, especially infrastructure.
Yeah, very good points, and I look forward to talking to you and whoever you direct to make sure that that happens.
Representative Weiss?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentation. Can you talk a little bit about, I know you alluded to specifically a lot of southern states and other states that we're competing with, and that there may be doing some things a little bit differently. Are we looking at what other states are doing and comparing? Obviously, we have an advantage in Michigan in that this industry is already here and we want to keep them here. But are we looking at what other states are doing and trying to see what we can do either from an economic investment standpoint in addition to other things that we could possibly be doing to attract and retain industry?
That's a great question, and absolutely. We have a team, we have two teams really. We have a market development team as well as, that's led by our chief strategist, Steve Bacall, as well as other teams that literally are doing competitive intelligence. And I'm part of a state economic development executives network, where periodically once a quarter we will get together, and we don't share all our notes, but we do some benchmarking. I will tell you that the level of rigor that we have in this SOAR process, I think is unique. I'm not saying that I think that it's far more unique, transparent. I'm not saying that it's not without its flaws, can't always be refined, but we are always looking to think about what must be required. What is the minimum amount to make sure that we can win? And I do want to just say parenthetically that in some respects, the SOAR fund was modeled on the Texas Closing Fund. And Texas is a state that has no state income tax, but yet they provided public investment to match private investment. And we know Tennessee, for example, another state that doesn't have personal income tax, that has also been incredibly aggressive, not only from an incentive perspective, but also in developing and aggregating mega sites. I mean, you can say the same about Georgia. The state of Georgia has a mega site authority. I would tell you, as a native of the South, there are only two states in the South that don't have an OEM or major tier 1 supplier. My home state of Florida, because they're not terribly interested in it, and Louisiana, and Louisiana would do whatever it took to get one, but they have a situation where they just candidly, and I think this is an advantage that's going to play to us moving forward, they have significant weather risks that we don't have here. Where their population is where hurricanes happen, and people just don't want to invest in that large number. But we can provide also the states, Greg, if you can work, to make sure that we can give you a sense of the states whom we benchmark. And it's not just also in the U.S., but it's also Canadian provinces, because we are a truly international state and we compete very aggressively, particularly with Quebec and Ontario.
Thank you. Representative Morse?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presenting this morning. So my question kind of feeds off Rep. Weiss's, but it's more, and it might be too early in the process, and in all the economic incentives that have been happening since the recession. But I'm just curious, is there data out there yet that supports which system or which type of system is most effective in attracting business? Is it grant systems? Is it taxation? Is it, I'm just wondering if, and it might be too soon for that, I understand. But obviously at some point, the more information we have on what really is truly successful, it can help us be more targeted and make the best use of our money.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, as you alluded to, is that we're still, I would say, to use a baseball analogy, we're probably in the early innings. Because we candidly, I mean, the construction for just even the GM or the Ford, those investments are in the process of happening. They haven't been fully actualized. But I do believe that we should be thinking about this as an and not an or. One of the things that I think is vitally important for this committee and your fellow colleagues in the legislature to think about is, we think about this in terms of ensuring that we grow our tax base. And this is all about to try to make sure that we can capture as much payroll, increase our state sales tax, and other revenue. And so I think that we will see in certain places, it is a mix of property tax abatements rather than direct cash. In other situations, it might be the reverse. But I think it's something that we do track. We have to track that. I mean, one of the reports that we have to provide to the legislature is on, what's the default, I don't want to say default, but, what's the number of companies. Thankfully, nobody's in non-compliance, but that's something that this body requests us to provide, and we do. But we're still early on. But I want to emphasize that this has to be an and, not an or. And I also believe, honestly, that we are dealing with an 18 to 30-month window because so many companies, whether they be in mobility or semiconductor or clean energy or other sectors, are already going to have deployed their cash. There won't be, the game will already be over. The allocations will already be made, and then they will play themselves out over the next 10 to 15 years. I will tell you, just for a semiconductor fab, that's a 20 to 30-year investment. A battery plant, similarly, tends to be a 15 to 20-year investment. So these are not, they're cycling through right now because people are trying to capture that window of opportunity that's been engendered by IRA, chips, geopolitical situation, whether it be Ukraine, things that are happening on the Asia Peninsula. At some point, that's going to stabilize, and then you will have a new normal, and you won't see this level of investment. And then we will look at some other things that are going to require our thoughts about what it takes to be competitive advantage.
Thank you. Representative Puri?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Executive Messer, for your testimony and presentation today. My question is also tangentially related to what Rep. Weiss and Rep. Morse were asking. I understand, obviously, the nature of the issue and the need for Michigan and the state of Michigan to be intentional in fighting for this industry. You mentioned a number of times about the performance-based nature of the SOAR fund, but when we holistically think about the package we're putting together to try to attract this business to the state of Michigan, do you feel we're doing enough at the state level to be competitive in the next 18 to 30 months to capture this evolution of industry that's happening and this innovation that is happening, and also just making sure that the SOAR fund is accomplishing its intended goal?
So it's a great question. I believe that right now we're talking about SOAR, but economic development is holistic, and because it's focused on 10 plus million Michiganders on both peninsulas. So I know that the governor, I know that this body has thoughts about things that should be happening in pre-K 3 through 12 education, higher education, making sure that we have greater workforce housing. I mean, there are a number of different things that go into making sure that a particular geography, in our case, the two most beautiful peninsulas in the world, are as competitive. We just happen to be talking about SOAR today. I could spend hours talking about thoughts that we have with regard to talent action teams that we've launched in mobility and semiconductor to make sure that men and women in Michigan have the training, the exposure to the opportunity to be prepared for these type of opportunities. We can also talk about the community revitalization and placemaking program, or the RAP program, that last year, $100 million, because we realized that not only must you have the right policy to attract investment, but companies are the people are the number one asset. So you need to make sure that they have the training, the expertise, and they also have to have places they want to live and recreate in order. So we understand it has to be holistic. We just happen to be talking about SOAR today because I want to make sure that I respond to the directive I was given by the chairwoman. But you're absolutely right. These other things are vitally important. That's why I want to emphasize the and nature of this. This is not an or. This has to be an and it has to be legislature and executive branch, once I present you sort of, here's what happened in the marketplace, then you will make the decision as elected officials.
Thank you. Representative Morgan?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much. This is very exciting. I'm excited to hear and to learn more about investing in business and job growth in Michigan. I'm wondering if you could talk about a little bit more of the Strategic Site Readiness Program awards. Coming from local government, one of the things I see is the need and importance of strengthening local communities through this process. And so I know that that is a part of this, and I'm curious just to learn more about kind of that piece of it.
Sure, thank you for the question. I think there are a couple of significant things on the strategic site readiness. This is not Lansing telling a local community what they should be doing. Any strategic site readiness was accompanied by a master planning process that it takes community input that happens in each locality. And it's not prescribed. Each locality is going to make its own decisions about what that process will look like. I think the second thing that's critically important is strategic site readiness may vary. For some places, it may be water and wastewater. For some places, it may be land assembly. So at some places, it may be ensuring that a substation is there. For some places, it may be clearing. But I think the other piece of it is that there's no governmental taking here. As we look through acquiring the land for these sites, they will be done voluntarily. I mean, people may say, look, I don't want to, and that's fine. But it has to be a process that's led by the local. That's why one of the slides, Greg, can you go back to the slide where we talked about the agreement, I'm sorry, that slide. No. It's a slide that basically said, maybe it's slide E9. 9. Yeah, I'm sorry, that one. I think the ultimate point there is that the awards are made to local economic development organizations and local governments. And so by definition, the awards have to be done in a way that respond to whatever the local aims, wants, and desires, and are cognizant of the unique local positions. But I think, again, this process is an iterative process in which we're continually getting better. And getting legislative feedback and input is a crucial part of that as we continue to what I would say rapidly prototype this particular program. Yeah.
Representative Schutte?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Quentin, Mr. Messer, for your presentation today. I appreciate it, especially the slide noting supporting our small businesses and your comments on the need for an and nature of economic competitiveness in our state. So I guess my question would be, is the MEDC and SOAR's mission of attracting, developing economic development, would that be helped and furthered by a reduction in our state income tax, especially since 99% of our small businesses pay this tax?
Representative, those are budget questions.
But it's related to them, okay.
Thank you. Representative Skaggs?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Messer. My question, which may dance around Representative Morse's question and Representative Pori's question, but essentially, you know, you've laid out a little bit about how international and national circumstances are going to affect us in the next 18 to 30 months. But can you go back a little bit and tell us where would we be now if we had not taken, if this body had not taken action in the past when we saw plants headed down south? What would be the landscape or the outlook? I know that it's hard to go into some detail that these projects are still ongoing, still ramping up, but in a broader picture, what do you see would be the overall sense of where Michigan is for economic outlook, for development outlook, compared to the rest of the country and specifically compared to the Great Lakes states?
So great question, Mr. Representative. I think we should go back and if we can try to go back in time and think about where we were in October of 2021. So in October of 2021, MEDC had exactly one tool in its toolbox for companies. It was a business development program grant that had a $10 million cap. We had just seen Ford make their decision to go to Tennessee and Kentucky. We had seen the CEO of Ford basically walk through some of those reasons. Let me just talk about some of those reasons. One was there were not enough investment dollars provided by the state relative to other states. Two, there was not a universe of mega sites that could respond to the speed of market that was required. Three, I think there was a misunderstanding of utility rates. And four, I think there was a concern that Dems, Republicans, Independents, Green Party members, Libertarians couldn't work together. I think that was a misconception. So what did we do subsequently? SOAR was passed that addressed the sites and the ability through critical industry program grants to participate as investors. Two, we began the process, and we now have three mega sites on the drawing board. We talk about, it's been publicly reported, Marshall, Lansing, and Mundy Township. And we're obviously looking for more without at all denigrating or compromising our proud agriculture and agribusiness heritage. The other thing is, due to the work of the Public Service Commission, our two publicly traded utilities, we created an economic development rate and an economic development tariff to bring us more in line. These are very energy-intensive industries, whether you're talking about EV and mobility or semiconductor or clean energy. And I think last is we proved with SOAR and the way that the process, and again, we're always looking to improve the process, that it is not a D or an R or UP or Lower Peninsula or Southeast or West Michigan. It's all of us, because I'll just be honest with you, we can fuss and fight and do what we want, but the world is like, we want what Michigan has. I mean, I will tell you that it wasn't an accident that, the senior senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, talked about South Carolina is going to become the Detroit of batteries. Imagine that. And what we have done is, I think, thwart that. Now, there's still work to be done, but that just goes to show you GM would not have happened. The largest single investment. Ford, other investments in the pipeline. The level of excitement, and people are seeing Michigan come back to the game. And I think that that's going to grow our tax base, ultimately grow our population, and make sure that we have robust economic opportunity for men and women, whether they want to be employers, employees, or entrepreneurs. So I hope that was responsive to your question.
Well, that was wonderful, if I may, Chair. To distill that down, we'd be in a pretty bleak situation right now if we hadn't acted in 2021. And we could possibly, in the next 18 to 30 months, if we don't continue on this successful path that we're on, find ourselves in a fairly bleak situation in 30 months. And as you said, it would be too late to course correct and move back into the situation, that this is a key moment in time.
Yes, I think you stated accurately. This is not Chicken Little. We are literally in a global competition to ensure the future of mobility, to make sure that we have a significant role in the future of semiconductors and clean energy, and making sure that we are participating aggressively and successfully in industries that have long value chains. This is, in many respects, critically important to make sure that small and medium-sized businesses here have large companies. Those typically are your best customers to make sure that we have them with significant investments and opportunity here. So indeed, we would be in a dire situation.
Thank you. Representative Fink.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I kind of want to go back to some questions that were asked a little earlier and see if I can get a little clarity, because I didn't quite understand the answer to a combination of questions that Rep. Green and Rep. Bolin were asking about the legislative oversight involved in the SOAR process. I left the Appropriations Committee shortly before the SOAR process was instituted last term, so I didn't get to experience the approval of particular expenditures from the SOAR fund. But that question would not come to this committee if the legislature directly appropriated to the Critical Industries Program or the Strategic Site Readiness Program. Isn't that right?
The question, can you go back, Greg, to the process slide? As I understand it, and I'm sure that there have been conversations in this iteration of the legislature that I may not be party to. But currently, the process is as follows. SOAR dollars are decided upon by the entire legislature. They are deposited into a fund. MEDC will make recommendations about opportunities, projects to draw against that fund. Each of those projects or opportunities will come to the House Appropes and the Senate Appropriation Committee. And at that point, you and your colleagues will opine on whether or not.
So to clarify my question, it's only if we deposit it in the SOAR fund. In other words, if we were to put the money directly into other funds like the Critical Industries Program or the Strategic Site Readiness Program, if we directly appropriate into those funds, then that second step of oversight from the legislature does not kick in. Am I right about that?
As I appreciate, unless things have changed and no one told me, the critical industry and the strategic site readiness funds are part of the SOAR fund. So you can't.
Okay, so
so they are part. They are the two constituent halves of the SOAR fund.
So your understanding is that if we were to put money into either of those pieces, that would still be subject to the normal SOAR process, and the Appropriations Committee would have to approve disbursements.
As I understand the SOAR process today, now maybe there have been conversations that elected officials have had.
No, thank you. That does answer my question. And then in terms of the repayment oversight issue, does the legislature have any role if MEDC or whoever it is in the administration thinks that repayment is necessary? Does the legislature have any role at that point, or is that strictly held in the administration?
I would say the following. I mean, we have a compliance function at MEDC that provides compliance, whether it's SOAR or the Business Development Program grants or the Community Development Program grants. I think ultimately, if there were a lot of projects that that had unremitable breaches, the legislative oversight would be, you probably would be, a different person would be sitting here or something else. But I don't know whether or not, let me tell you, compliance is not easy. And sometimes, I don't know whether it'll be, if you're saying directly, the legislature will come back and sort of want to get into clawback. I just don't know. I'm going to leave that for elected officials. If that's what you want to do, I will tell you this. It would be unprecedented if the legislature wanted to act in that way. And potentially, our competition could use that to disadvantage us, because it would be a significant wild card. And we all know, many of you lead successful businesses, or just in life, we want predictability. And I think potentially going down that road would lead to a level of unpredictability that would not be positive for Team Michigan. But I leave that for the elected officials.
Thank you, Representative. And I know you have limited time, so we're going to wrap this up with a question from Representative Hood.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you at length and for your presentation. Thank you for all the work that you're doing to make sure we're successful. My questions are around research and development. I've heard a lot from the R&D community that Michigan could do more. What might we do that would be very compatible to SOAR and would help us to reach into these mobility industries, semiconductors, clean energy, more deeply in order to create more of that stickiness? That is part one. And then part two, over my lifetime, I consider myself a woman of the state. I'm a Detroiter, born and bred, moved to Grand Rapids as a young adult, and watched Grand Rapids perform and stabilize during some of Michigan's darkest economic hours because of our diversity, the diversity of industries there, whereas I watched, my hometown communities struggle, massive population movements away from the Metro Detroit area. So I obviously believe and care deeply about mobility on several different levels, placemaking all the way to EVs and new technologies, and I think it's clear with the recent investment in our workers from the GM that with their $12,000 bonus, that we're doing well. And I'm wondering how we're balancing diversity and making sure that these SOAR funds are attractive outside of the mobility industry, as much as I love and respect it. Thank you.
No, two great questions. Let me deal with them in order. With regard to the R&D, I think there are a couple of things that we should be doing in addition to SOAR. I mean, today the subject matter was SOAR. But I think one, the continued investment in public and private higher education is vitally important, 2- and 4-year universities. And we also have to make sure that we support people who are not maybe going to higher ed in the traditional 18 to 25 time period. If you go serve in the military, you do something else, and you decide as a 30-year-old or 35-year-old that you want to pursue that, we need to move that. And I think the governor in this legislature, whether it was 60 by 30 or Future for Frontliners, those type of programs are beneficial for that. But I think the governor has been very forceful. I think it has bipartisan support. We need an R&D tax credit or incentive or something creatively. I mean, we can. That's why it has to be a partnership to think about, because you can't say that you're the state. I believe that you can't talk about American innovation without talking about Michigan. But you can't say that and then not have the requisite tools and behavior characteristics that will show that you're serious about it moving forward. So I think that an R&D incentive or something to directionally show that we're serious about that in the 21st century as serious as we were in the 20th century. To your point about diversification, to the second question, my view, and I think this would be shared by mobility executives, we need to make sure that mobility continues to grow, but as a portion of the entire economy, the percentage decreases. So that other sectors, whether it's life sciences or medical devices or vertical farming as a new agribusiness sector or aerospace, I mean, I can call the role, tourism, hospitality, feel a bigger part of the pie. And again, this is the and nature, and this is what makes Michigan tremendous and puts us in a competitive framework, because we can talk about, we're not a one-trick pony. We got so many other things, but we also need to, as I tell people all the time, I wake up every morning thinking about the economic future of 10+ million friends and neighbors. And we've got to win now, because I'm going to tell you, if we don't win now, 18, 30 months, and I think Rep. Skaggs talked about it, it's hard for parents to be engaged parents and invested in the education of their children if they're economically insecure. It's very difficult. You can do whatever you want to do, but it's hard to feel good and to really provide the reading, the prenatal, and all the nurturing that requires if you're economically insecure. And my responsibility to you is to try to give you as much unfettered, objective advice about what it would take for us to be economically competitive and diversification without sacrificing or walking away from is what we have to do.
Thank you, and thank you both for being here. I know you're always available to the legislature, and there were a few more questions, but I'll make sure that they have your information so that they can give you a call. Representative Leitner moves to excuse absent members without objection, so ordered. Seeing no further business, the committee will stand adjourned.